to be delivered with calm, high-status presence, steady eye contact, and deliberate pacing. Imagine standing in front of someone who has spent years mapping your mind. They know exactly which wire to pull to make you feel small. They know the precise tone of voice that makes your chest tighten, the specific look that makes you doubt your own sanity. They have run this play 1,000 times. They press the button, and nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. No tears, no defensive explanations, no desperate pleas for them to understand your side. Just a calm, steady gaze. In that single quiet moment, a terrifying realization hits them. The game is not just over. The board has been wiped clean. What you are looking at is the absolute worst nightmare of any psychological manipulator. They aren't afraid of your anger. In fact, they crave it. Your rage is proof that they still hold the remote control to your nervous system. What paralyzes them with a cold, visceral fear is your healing. Most people think healing is a quiet, gentle process of self-care and soft boundaries. But in the theater of human behavior, a healed empath is a force of absolute disruption. You are no longer reacting, you are observing. And to a manipulator, an observer is a predator. If you have ever felt trapped in the orbit of someone who feeds on your empathy, you need to understand the hidden mechanics of this power dynamic. Today, we aren't just talking about moving on, we are decoding the exact moment the hunter becomes the hunted, not through revenge, but through the terrifying power of a restored mind. If you slip away before we dissect these 5 behavioral shifts, you will miss the blueprint to becoming entirely immune to their psychological gravity. You will leave the door cracked. But if you stay, you will understand exactly why your peace is their ultimate defeat. We are conditioned to believe that human interactions are purely emotional. They are not. They are deeply behavioral, rooted in stimulus and response. A manipulator operates like an amateur programmer. They write a line of code, a backhanded compliment, a silent treatment, a sudden burst of warmth followed by cold distance, and they expect a highly specific output from you. They need your anxiety. They need your defense mechanisms to kick in. Why? Because your reaction is the mirror in which they view their own significance. But when an empath heals, they do something highly unusual. They engage in what we call a pattern interrupt. When the old stimulus is introduced, the healed empath does not produce the expected response. They don't jump to fix the silence. They don't apologize for things they didn't do. They sit in the discomfort of the tension, entirely unmoved. To the narcissist nervous system, this is a system failure. It is the equivalent of pressing a light switch and having the room go pitch black instead. It triggers a profound instinctual anxiety within them because their entire sense of safety is built on their ability to predict and control your emotional state. Let's look at the micro-expressions. Let's look at the body language. An unhealed empath who is trying to be strong often fakes strength. Their shoulders are tense. Their jaw is clenched. Their eyes dart. The narcissist sees this. They read the micro-expressions of struggle and think, they are trying to fight me. That means I still have them. A healed empath has nothing to prove. Their posture is open, relaxed, and entirely neutral. Their blink rate is calm. Their voice sits in a lower, resonant register. This neutrality is terrifying. Anger is a form of engagement. Neutrality is a total lack of investment. When you look at a manipulator with calm, objective curiosity, the way a scientist looks at a specimen under a microscope, you strip them of their armor. You are no longer participating in the illusion. You are simply watching them perform. And nothing terrifies a performer more than an audience that refuses to applaud, boo, or even leave, but simply watches with a quiet, knowing smile. The deepest secret of the narcissistic mind is not grandiosity. It is an overwhelming, paralyzing fear of insignificance. They have built a towering, fragile fortress of a false self to hide a hollow core. An unhealed empath is a caretaker. They walk into that fortress and try to warm it up. They offer their light, their energy, and their understanding to fill the void. But the healed empath stops carrying the matches. Instead, they become a mirror. Without the empath's constant projection of warmth, the narcissist is forced to look at the cold, empty space they have created. In your presence, they no longer see their grandiose reflection. They see their own emptiness. Your boundaries act as a hard boundary wall, bouncing their own toxicity straight back into their face. They realize that you see them, not the mask, not the charm, not the pity-inducing stories. You see the raw, unpolished truth of who they are. True healing is not a state of perpetual bliss. It is the integration of your shadow. It is the moment you realize that your empathy is not a weakness to be protected, but a high-level intelligence system to be directed. When you step into this level of self-mastery, your presence changes the room. You possess a psychological authority that cannot be faked. Manipulators are hyper-attuned to authority. They look for targets they can dominate, and they run from those who cannot be moved. When a healed empath sets a boundary, it isn't an argument, it is a statement of fact. It is as solid as gravity. The narcissist will try their usual toolkit. They will try the guilt trips, the projection, the gaslighting. But watching those tactics bounce off a healed empath is like watching paper airplanes throw themselves against a brick wall. They fold, they crumple, they fall to the ground. In the end, the narcissist does not change. They do not have an epiphany. They do not realize the error of their ways. Instead, they do what all predators do when they encounter a target that is too difficult, too dangerous, and too costly to hunt. They flee. They will pack up their games, their masks, and their manipulations, and they will look for easier soil. They will seek out someone who still has open wounds to exploit. Do not view their departure as a loss. Do not view their silence as a punishment. It is the ultimate concession of defeat. Your healing did not just protect you, it made you entirely unpalatable to their parasitic nature. You survived the storm, not by fighting the wind, but by becoming the mountain. Stand tall, keep your eyes open, and let them run from the light you worked so hard to rebuild. The core of the interaction between a manipulator and their target does not reside in the realm of conscious choice. It is governed by a deeply grooved, highly predictable stimulus-response loop. For years, the narcissist has operated like an experienced hacker who has successfully reverse-engineered your psychological code. They know precisely which behavioral keystrokes to input to guarantee a highly specific emotional output. They drop a subtle, backhanded compliment, and they expect the output of self-doubt. They weaponize a cold, sudden silence, and they expect the output of frantic overcompensation and anxious text messages. They throw a manufactured tantrum, and they expect you to assume the role of the emotional caretaker. This predictability is not just convenient for them, it is their psychological oxygen. It is how they regulate their own unstable nervous system. They require your predictable reaction to feel a sense of control, safety, and dominance. It is a closed-loop feedback system where they pull the string and you dance. But when an empath undergoes true healing, they do something that completely shatters this machinery. They introduce a massive, catastrophic pattern interrupt. A pattern interrupt is a concept from behavioral psychology where a habitual automatic sequence of behavior is suddenly and unexpectedly broken. When the narcissist inputs the classic stimulus, expecting the familiar cascade of tears, defensiveness, or desperate explanations, they are met with something their system is entirely unprepared to process. They are met with a wall of absolute, undisturbed stillness. To the narcissist brain, this is a terrifying system error. When a machine is programmed to receive an input and produce an output, and suddenly the output simply ceases to exist, The machine begins to redline. The narcissist's nervous system immediately enters a state of high alert panic. Without your reaction, they lose their bearing in reality. They no longer know where they stand, how much leverage they possess, or if they have any power at all. The silence of a healed empath is not the wounded silence of the silent treatment. It is the spacious, observant silence of an absolute sovereign. Because the narcissist relies on predictability to feel safe, the introduction of this wild, unpredictable variable, a person who simply observes without absorbing, instantly triggers their deepest survival instincts. They will initially try to press the buttons harder, escalating the provocation, trying frantically to force the old code to run. They might scream louder, gaslight more aggressively, or play the victim with greater theatricality. But when those escalated inputs continue to yield a flat, neutral zero, the illusion of their control completely evaporates. The loop is broken, the power dynamic is permanently inverted, and the narcissist is left standing alone in the quiet wreckage of their own failed programming, staring at a psychological wall they can neither scale nor bypass. To understand the mechanics of psychological manipulation, we must look past the surface-level drama and examine the hidden currency of the exchange: leverage. A manipulator's perceived power is never self-sustaining. It is entirely parasitic, drawing its life force from the unhealed wounds, the unresolved traumas, and the deep-seated fears of abandonment or inadequacy within the target. These vulnerabilities act as psychological handles. The narcissist spend their early interactions with you quietly locating these handles, mapping out where you are soft, where you are desperate for approval, and where you fear rejection. Once these handles are identified, they can pull them at will to steer your behavior, dictating how you think, feel, and react. The illusion of their absolute control is built entirely on the existence of these open, raw wounds. They do not possess inherent dominance. They merely exploit the access points you have left unguarded because you have not yet learned how to heal them. When an empath commits to the deep, often painful work of healing, they are essentially dismantling these handles one by one. Healing is the systematic closure of these psychological entry points. It is the process of looking at your own shadow, understanding your own hunger for external validation, and learning to provide that validation for yourself. As these wounds close and scar over, the narcissist's grip begins to slip. They reach out to pull the usual handle of guilt, but find nothing to grab onto. They try to weaponize the fear of abandonment, but find that you have already made peace with standing alone. They attempt to trigger your shame, but meet a self-concept that is fully integrated and secure. In this moment, the illusion of their control is shattered, exposing the terrifying truth they have spent their entire lives trying to outrun. They have no power over you other than the power you unconsciously surrendered through your unhealed pain. This collapse of control triggers an intense, visceral panic within the narcissist because it forces a confrontation with their greatest fear, the fear of being truly seen. When they can no longer manipulate your perception of them, their fragile, grandiose mask begins to crack. They realize that without your compliance, they are entirely exposed. They are forced to confront the stark reality of their own emptiness, stripped of the emotional reactions they use to shield themselves from their own deep-seated self-loathing. The healed empath becomes a terrifying figure, not because they are actively hostile, but because their quiet, unshakable autonomy acts as a spotlight, shining directly on the narcissist's deepest insecurities. The narcissist suddenly finds themselves completely powerless, staring into the eyes of someone who is no longer buying the performance, no longer reacting to the cues, and no longer willing to sacrifice their own peace to maintain the manipulator's fragile ego. When we look at the standard battlefield of human conflict, we see a heavy reliance on emotional ammunition. When someone attacks us, insults us, or attempts to manipulate our perception of reality, our instinctual survival mechanisms urge us to fight back. We scream, we defend our character, we point out their hypocrisy, or we retreat into a visible, wounded silence. To a master manipulator, every single one of these responses is a victory. Anger, defensiveness, and sadness are active emotional currents. They are proof that the manipulator still holds the remote control to your nervous system, that they can still command your energy and dictate your focus. But when an empath heals, they discover a countermeasure that is far more devastating than any retaliatory strike. The weapon of absolute, unyielding neutrality. This is not the cold, passive-aggressive silence of someone trying to punish another. It is the calm, spacious indifference of someone who has simply opted out of the theater entirely. In the study of behavioral psychology, neutral observation is the ultimate destabilizing force against manipulation. A manipulator's tactics require resistance to function. They need you to pull back on the rope so they can maintain their balance and leverage. When you drop the rope completely and look at them with a flat, objective, and unemotional gaze, you deny them the friction they need to stand. You are no longer reacting to the content of their words. You are calmly observing the process of their behavior. When they attempt to bait you with a cruel comment or a manufactured crisis, your response is not a counterattack, but a simple, detached acknowledgement, like an observer noting a shift in the weather. This total absence of emotional resonance acts as a psychological vacuum, sucking the oxygen right out of their performance. They are left screaming into an empty canyon, receiving nothing but the echo of their own desperation. To the narcissist, this neutrality is far more terrifying than anger. Anger still communicates value. It says, "You are important enough to make me lose my peace." Neutrality, however, communicates absolute irrelevance. It tells the narcissist that their loudest storms are not even strong enough to rustle the leaves on your trees. When you sit in this state of calm, centered observation, your physical posture and micro-expressions reflect a complete lack of threat or submission. Your shoulders are relaxed, your breathing is deep and steady, and your eyes do not wander in search of exit routes or reassurance. You look at them not as an adversary to be defeated, but as an unfolding behavioral event that has absolutely nothing to do with you. This complete lack of emotional hook paralyzes the manipulator because they have no protocols for dealing with an opponent who refuses to play, refuses to fight, and refuses to care. To understand why a healed empath is so deeply unsettling to a manipulator, we have to look at the psychological concept of shadow work and the mechanics of projection. A narcissist is an individual who has completely severed connection with their true self, burying their deepest shame, vulnerability, and feelings of worthlessness beneath a heavily fortified, grandiose, false persona. Because they cannot tolerate looking at their own internal shadow, they are forced to project it onto the outside world, using the people around them as external screens. They need you to play the role of the flawed, unstable, and guilty one, so that they can feel superior, stable, and righteous by comparison. An unhealed empath, driven by a deep desire to help, heal, and keep the peace, unwittingly cooperates with this dynamic. They accept the projection, absorbing the blame, working tirelessly to fix problems they did not cause, and essentially acting as an emotional sponge that keeps the narcissist's toxic waste safely contained away from their own conscious awareness. When the empath heals, however, this sponge-like quality is permanently replaced by a mirror-like quality. Through the process of integrating their own shadow, the healed empath learns to stop carrying emotional weight that does not belong to them. They stop absorbing the projected shame and guilt. When the narcissist attempts to throw their usual baggage of blame, anger, or inadequacy onto the empath, the healed empath's clean, solid psychological boundary acts as an impenetrable reflective surface. The projections do not stick. They simply bounce straight back to where they originated. In behavioral terms, the healed empath becomes a completely passive mirror, reflecting the narcissist's behavior back to them in its rawest, most undistorted form. Without the empath's constant emotional buffering, the narcissist is suddenly forced to stand in the presence of their own ugliness, their own manipulation, and their own profound emptiness. This creates an agonizing psychological crisis for the manipulator. The very presence of a healed empath forces a confrontation with the exact internal void the narcissist has spent their entire life running from. They can no longer hide behind the narrative that you are the crazy, unstable, or problematic one, because your calm, centered reality makes their chaotic dysfunction completely obvious to everyone in the room, including themselves. You are no longer painting over their cracks with your forgiveness or absorbing their venom with your understanding. By simply standing in your truth and refusing to carry their distortions, you hold up an unshakable mirror that forces them to look directly into the abyss of their own unhealed psyche. They are suddenly exposed to themselves, stripped of the emotional camouflage they rely on to survive, and forced to face the terrifying realization that their carefully constructed illusion has absolutely no power over a mind that has learned to see right through it. In the realm of relational dynamics, boundaries are often misunderstood as active verbal confrontations, moments where we must raise our voices, draw physical lines, or engage in tense negotiations to protect our personal space. For an unhealed empath, setting a boundary is typically an incredibly stressful, high-energy event, often accompanied by a flood of explanations, justifications, and defensive arguments. This frantic energy is a signal to a predator. It tells the narcissist that the boundary is fragile, negotiable, and driven by fear. But when an empath heals, the nature of their boundaries undergoes a profound structural evolution. They are no longer desperate defensive walls built in a panic to keep a threat out. Instead, they transform into quiet, non-negotiable laws of physics. They become an organic extension of the healed empath's self-concept, requiring zero justification, zero emotional display, and zero external validation to exist. This dramatic shift is not communicated through loud declarations or dramatic ultimatums, but through subtle, unconscious somatic signals that the narcissist's hypervigilant nervous system detects instantly. Human beings are incredibly sensitive to microexpressions, posture, and vocal acoustics, and manipulators are particularly adept at reading these primal cues to assess vulnerability. When a healed empath establishes a boundary, their body language lacks even a trace of submission, hesitation, or performative anger. Their shoulders remain dropped and relaxed, their breathing is slow and diaphragmatic, their eye contact is steady without being aggressive, and their vocal tone remains completely flat, grounded, and low in pitch. There is no upward inflection at the end of their sentences asking for permission, and there is no rush to fill the silence after they speak. They do not say, "Please respect me," but rather their entire physical presence communicates, "Respect is the baseline fee for entry into my reality, and if you cannot pay it, you do not exist here." To a narcissist, sensing this new frequency of boundary is an incredibly jarring and alarming experience. They are accustomed to boundaries that bend under pressure, but when they test this new barrier, they encounter something as unyielding as a mountain. The total absence of emotional friction or defensive posturing tells them that this is not a boundary born of anger, which they could easily manipulate, but a boundary born of absolute self-allegiance. It is a quiet, natural law of the environment. The narcissist instantly realizes that any attempt to push, guilt trip, or negotiate past this point will result in a complete waste of their energy. The sheer weight of this quiet authority triggers an instinctual flight response within them. They recognize that they are no longer dealing with a compliant resource they can harvest,